Hey, good people. Yvette Madison here, your instructor for Intro to Social Work. We are going to begin with Chapter 1 today. And I'm in the process of sharing my screen with you because I want to have the PowerPoint slides available for you to follow as I lecture through the beginning, or I should say Chapter 1 of this course. But before we get started in talking about the information in Chapter 1, I want you to just think about this question I'm going to ask you. Not that you need to give me an answer because it's not about me, but I want you to think about it in and of yourselves. Why are you going into a helping profession? Whether it is as a social worker, a substance abuse counselor, why are you going into this profession? And what are your thoughts about what qualifies you to be successful in this profession? Not so much about the alphabet soup behind your name, good people, but about your character as a helping professional. That's the beginning part of Chapter 1 as we begin to go over some of the information. So as you see here, I do have the PowerPoint slides available for you, and the PowerPoint slides will also be published in your weekly folder so that you'll be able to use those as you go along in the reading, just for some reference as well. All right, so let's just get started in talking about social work as a profession. When we talk about social work as a profession, the book kind of gives us some specific definitions and things that we look at when we define social work as a profession. The very first thing it says is that it resolves problems. Social workers, we resolve problems. A lot of times we may have, or some of us may have found our way into the helping profession because someone told us, oh, you listen really well, or you give great advice. The thing that we have to be mindful of in working as social workers within the helping profession is that it's really easy to jump quickly to advice or resolution of a problem, which is kind of what we want to do. But what we have to do is to walk the client through for them to see resolution to the problem that they may be presenting with. When we're talking about the systems that we work with, in the field of social work, we work with individuals as well as groups. So we may find some of our clients being families, individuals within the families. It may be groups such as your substance abuse treatment participants. It may be someone within an agency or organization. It could be a self-help group. Social workers also work within the community at large. So you may be working with companies and organizations within their employee structure. The thing, again, that we have to be mindful of as social workers is that we want to make sure that we're walking with our clients in seeking resolution. When we're talking about social work as a profession, you see here in this slide, the qualities that we look at, the characteristics that we look for with people functioning in that position as being a social worker. Warmth, honesty, genuineness, openness, hopefulness, humility, sensitivity. These are the things that we're looking for. Not so much that we want to be that quick answer person, and not so much that people want to hear everything that we have to say. But we just have to be mindful that it's important that people recognize that we are listening when they are talking. When we're working or when we're talking about being in the social work profession and working as a social worker, one of the things that we want to be mindful of is that there are very specific educational requirements, very specific skills that you learn as a generalist in the field of social work in your education. So we want to make sure that when we talk about being a social worker, I'm sorry, there's a little gnat flying around me. We want to make sure that we take pride in our profession, recognizing the education, the educational foundation, and recognizing the skills that we have learned. When we talk about being a generalist social worker or learning within a generalist program, we are learning information that establishes our foundation, and the foundation in being a strong and competent helping professional. So we have very limited information, I should say, in specific client populations, but all of our information that we receive as a generalist is meant for us to be able to transition from population to population and be successful when we're working in that population. When we talk about the mission and the purpose of social work, if you look in your books on page 7 in your textbook, it gives us very specific information about the mission of the social work profession. The very last statement in this paragraph on page 7 It states that social workers strengthen human functioning and enhance the effectiveness of the structures in society that provide resources and opportunities for clients or for citizens. One of the things that we look at is exactly what this last bullet here talks about. We want to empower people. Folks are going to come to you, your clients, your consumers, patients, whatever title they may have, depending on the agency or organization you work with. When they come to you, they are sick, injured, in need of, they're just searching for something, someone to help them. Our goal as human services workers, as social workers, is to empower people, excuse me, to be able to make the changes that are necessary in their lives so they can be successful in moving beyond the issue that may have presented itself to them. Let me go back one slide. When we talk about the social work perspective, one of the theories that we have to be mindful of, or that we're going to be focusing on and looking at, his perspective is C. Wright Mills. Now, if you took sociology, this person, or I should say listening or learning about C. Wright Mills should be just a refresher for you. C. Wright Mills is a theorist who said that oftentimes we look at personal troubles and they oftentimes become public issues. Personal troubles become public issues. What does that mean? Well, if we're talking about a family that may be going through right now some of the issues relating to the pandemic in our area or in our country, some of them have had a decrease in hours. Some of them may have lost their jobs. So the issue of unemployment, which may seem very well as being a private issue, and it very well probably was in the not too distant past, but because of our current social structure, unemployment is now a very strong and highlighted public issue that we have to think about. How is this impacting the way the family functions? What is going on within the family system? When we talk about individual or personal problems becoming public problems, we got to look at some very specific strengths and weaknesses or needs that our patient, client, consumer may be struggling with. The first thing the book talks about, or that's here on the slide, would be our universal or basic needs. We need to make sure that folks have the physical, intellectual, emotional, social needs being cared for, that they feel as though that they can be successful. And sometimes we see that spelled out right here in Maslow's hierarchy of need when we talk about behavioral issues or motivational needs. With Maslow's hierarchy of need, excuse me, it consists of 5 elements, and they are physical, your physical needs, your safety needs, your intimacy needs, a person's self-esteem, and all of that accumulating to the point where we have this self-actualization. We know that based on Maslow's hierarchy of need, if those 4 basic needs are not being met, then it is going to be a challenge for someone to reach that B need, which is that self-actualization. Knowing that I know that I know that I know, I will be okay through this problem. When we're talking about working with someone's strengths versus their weaknesses, as a social worker, we have to be prepared to identify the weakness, highlight the strength, so that they can begin, they meaning our client, consumer, patient, can begin to see the balances that they have in their lives so that they can reach their goal and get to this point of self-actualization. When we talk about personal development, we'll get into that a little bit when we talk about some of the theorists, such as Erik Erikson and Sigmund Freud. When we're looking at personal development and personal growth, we're talking about how well we adapt to the environment around us. What's going on that is getting us to this place of recognizing what my strengths are as it is determined within the environment that I'm in. Some of the other issues that we got to look at, our cultural strengths. As social workers, we must be mindful that everyone does not think the way we think. People don't believe the things that we believe, and nor do we believe everything that others believe. So we must recognize the strength that comes with one's cultural values and beliefs. And how do we as social workers tap into that and access that, identify it as a strength for our client, consumer, patient? When we're talking about our cultural needs, this oftentimes bleeds right into this whole idea, the second bullet, of social justice and human rights. When we're looking at the social work perspective and how we deal with those things, we need to be mindful that our participation and the way that society functions, it sometimes is dependent on this generational perspective that folks may have. When we're talking about social justice and human rights, I think it's fair to say that we have a good example, a good assessment of that going on within our society right now, with a lot of the issues that have been at hand recently, just when we're talking about social conflict, social justice within our system or our cultural beliefs right now. So as we go on and we talk about the social work perspectives, the very last thing that I want to look at as we tap into, again, this social rights and human justice, is this whole idea of the social and physical environment. How we view the client, consumer, patient, how do they view the possibilities of meeting society's established cultural goals? If you had intro to sociology and you think back to the chapter on deviance, one of the theorists that we talked about was Robert Merton. And Robert Merton had talked about deviance and identified it in 5 different perspectives. And one of the perspectives that Merton talked about was this whole idea in deviance that people function according to deviance because they have to do what they need to do by whatever means necessary in order to meet the culturally approved goals. So when we're talking about our social or physical environments, how does that weigh in and how does that impact the work, or I should say the vision and the perspective that our client, consumers, and patients have about themselves in addressing the problem that they may be bringing to you? Finally, with social work perspectives, one of the things that we look at would be the goals of the social work profession. This is going to be found in your books on page 12. There's 4 specific goals that we look at. We look at enhancing the client's capacities. Again, looking at identifying what their strengths may be, what their weaknesses may be, and building up the strengths so that they see the good more so than seeing the bad. We link people to resources. We are going to be providing information to folks that's going to assist them, again, in meeting their desired goal. We are not going to be hand-holding folks and walking them to resources, but I'm going to provide you with the information and talk you through and how to access that information. The third one we look at is we improve the delivery network. Sometimes there's a break in the system. Sometimes the system doesn't work very well. And I think it's safe to say that, yeah, we kind of see that right now in some various aspects going on in society today. So one of the goals that we have as social workers is to look at how do we improve the system as it currently exists. Fourth and finally, we promote social justice. Our primary goal as social workers is to empower those who may feel oppressed, empower the marginalized population, empower those who feel as though they are left behind or that their voices are not heard. So when we're talking about empowerment, we're talking about, again, going back to the very beginning, enhancing our clients' strengths over their weaknesses so that they too can get to the place where they see recognition right at the finish line. Social work and social welfare, we're going to get into this a little bit, the relationship between the two. When we're talking about social work and social welfare, we have various social institutions that we must pay attention to. When we're talking about our social institutions, we're talking about those aspects in society that participate in helping us to establish the foundation of who we are. So we're talking about our families, the educational system, we're talking about religion, we're talking about politics, we're talking about social welfare. Now be mindful, good people, social welfare, not in public assistance, but social welfare meaning what is it that the system has to provide that may be either hindering or helping a client, consumer, patient in reaching their goals. When we talk about social welfare, we want to make sure that we're looking at, or I should say, highlight what is in the best interest, the general well-being of our client, consumer, patient. What is it that's going on within the system? addressing the universal need so that the personal need of our client, consumer, patient can be met. So again, when we're talking about social institutions, we're looking at the individual and the micro system of that individual, the issues or the components that currently play a factor in how this individual may function. So their family, their workplace, their place of faith, political, excuse me, political orientation, things like that. When we're talking about social welfare, we're looking at, again, a universal social welfare institution, the universal or the general issues, the general system, I should say, at play is going to be functioning on behalf of the individual. When we're looking at the social welfare system, the book talks about social welfare functioning in two aspects, our residual view and our institutional view. When we're talking about the residual view, we're looking at how things are limited. We're looking at where the breakdown may be for the individual within a social welfare system and feeling as though their issues are being addressed. When we're talking about that institutional view, again, we're looking at how social welfare may be integrated in the functioning of the individuals who are in need of assistance. Again, when we're talking about social welfare, and we get into this a little bit more in chapter 2, as we identify what social welfare is, we're not simply talking about people receiving public assistance. So let's make sure that we have that clarity in mind. We're not just talking about that, but we're looking at the system as a whole and how that impacts our client, consumers, and patients. The book then gets into a couple of different examples and information, starting on page 18 in your text, about different fields of practice that you can get into within the field of social work. When we talk about social work, we are more than a one-trick pony. The field of social work is kind of an umbrella field, meaning that there are different occupations that come underneath the umbrella of being a social worker. So you can work in various populations in various areas. So please take the opportunity of reviewing the table on pages 18 and 19 in your text to get an idea of where your area of interest may be, because that will then direct your graduate studies, because then you'll be focusing on those specific areas of population. When we talk about social work as a profession, we know that it continues to grow because the need continues to be there. Now, I need to remind you of something, good people, when we talk about social work as a profession. If you're going into the helping profession because you think you're going to make a lot of money, let me burst your bubble right now and tell you that will not happen. The helping profession is not one in that you're going to make a lot of money, but you will make significant changes in one's life. So when we're looking at the field of social work, the helping profession, it's all about wanting to make change happen. When we talk about wanting to make change happen, this is where we see a little bit, again, of a reflection back in Intro to Sociology, when we talk about how social work is impacted by social welfare. We look at it from a structural functional perspective and a social conflict perspective. Now, remember, when we talk about structural functional, excuse me, we're looking at what is going on in society that is creating a dysfunction and how an individual, group, or family may be able to meet their needs. What is creating the dysfunction? And in that dysfunction, is there any element, or are there any elements, excuse me, of inequality? Any elements that there may be the possibility of oppression, or the possibility of one feeling marginalized or less than. So when we're talking about looking at social work and social welfare, we got to make sure that we, first of all, recognize the dysfunction within society, the inequality that's being created by that dysfunction, and how that impacts the person and or client themselves. When we look at that, the biggest thing that we have to be mindful of is that the work that we do as a social worker is in partnership with our clients, consumers, or patients. We do not work in a silo in and of ourselves so that we can have that pat on the back, oh, look how good I did. It's not about us. It's not about the alphabet soup behind our name. It's all about how are we making change happen as a partnership with our client, consumer, patient. So those are things, again, that we just have to be mindful of. The very last part of chapter 1, when we talk about being a social worker and working within the helping profession, it's all about empowerment. How do we give folks the permission, the tools, the resources to know that they know that they know that they will be successful in making it through this issue that brought them to us? See, our primary goal in the field of social work as a helping professional is to work ourselves out of a job. That's what we want to do. Unfortunately, we're not going to work ourselves out of a job, because just with human nature in and of itself, people are always in need of something, guidance about something, an answer for something. But our goal is to empower them to learn how to tap into the self, utilize the resources around them so that they can become empowered to solve the problem, to find the answer that they're seeking. So when we talk about empowerment, this is the last part of chapter 1. Social work as the empowering profession, it kind of gives us some definitions in the very beginning about what it is we're looking at. And what does empowerment mean? Looking at things from a personal, interpersonal, and a socio-political perspective. Personal, what is it about me that I'm struggling with? Interpersonal, what is it about me that is creating the dysfunction that I can't find the right answer? Not just me, the person, but my little circle of trust, that micro perspective, all of the elements that I'm involved in. What is it that may be feeding into the dysfunction? And sociopolitical, when we're talking about the sociopolitical, again, how is society and the politics maybe that are in play, how is that hindering my profession or hindering me from moving forward? When we talk about social work and being the empowered profession and empowering people, one of the things that we want to be mindful of that we are always going to be doing is that we are going to be providing folks access to resources that they may or may not have known were in existence. When we talk about providing resources, the thing that we must be mindful of is that although we're providing folks with the resources, sometimes people feel like I should have known that, but I didn't know that. So sometimes there may be some counseling that needs to take place so that a client consumer patient can recognize in and of themselves that they are in control of the direction that they're going to be going in. Not so much that society is going to dictate it, but that they have the control within themselves. When we talk about that empowering profession, excuse me, as I stated before, we focus on the strengths of our clients so that they outweigh the weaknesses. We work as a partner with our clients, consumer patients. We don't want to be the ones that say, here, this is what you do. Here, this is where you go. But we're going to be talking with our clients and guiding them through the resources that we provide for them so that they can begin to see the connection. Not always about us, but always about our clients, consumer patients. Excuse me. When we talk about social work as an empowering profession, we must be mindful of diversity in the clients that we work with. Diversity with our clients, consumer patients, diversity with our colleagues within the profession. We have to have a multicultural perspective, and we must be knowledgeable in many areas when it comes down to cultural diversity. And we're going to get into that a little bit, especially when we talk about the respectful model, the respectful counseling model that we're going to be looking at, as it helps us to identify areas that we, the worker, may have some hesitation, some uncertainty about in working with folks that may fall in certain areas. And let me say this, good people, it is okay to acknowledge that you are not 100% confident in working with people in any specific area. It is okay, because as soon as you acknowledge that, then you are opening yourselves up to learning to grow from that. For the longest time, I simply refused. I refused to work in the field of gerontology. I made sure I made it clear in undergrad and my graduate studies, my focus is on children, youth, and families. I don't want to be in gerontology because I didn't want to work with the elderly. Because at that time, I had no interest in knowing about the elderly. But as I grew older and as I became more wise and as I became more knowledgeable about what my client base could offer me in working with a geriatric population, then things began to shift. So when we're talking about looking at cultural diversity and cultural differences, we have to make sure that we're mindful of what our comfort is, what our hesitation may be, and be mindful that we work towards filling those shortcomings with something positive. Empowering profession of social work, we look at it from a human rights perspective. We look at viewing the problem, issue, the crisis from the client's perspective, not ours. Because again, good people, it's not about you. It's about our clients, consumers, and patients. We look at building relationships. How are we facilitating a working relationship with our client, consumer, patient? Not a friendship relationship, not an intimate relationship. We'll get into all of that in later chapters, but looking at a strong working relationship. How are we networking, both personally for ourselves within our profession, but also with political resources? Because as a social worker, some of the things that we want to look at is how can we make change happen from a political perspective? And we're going to talk about that again in later chapters. Finally, we look at advocating for policy changes, advocating for things that are right that may not appear to be right, advocating for things that our clients and consumers and patients are just in need of. As a social worker, our job is not to just merely sit behind a desk and do dictation or writing client case files, but our job is to provide access to resources and to make change happen. That's what we're charged to do as social workers. So I'm hoping that you get good understanding from chapter 1 as you read through it. And I hope this information helps you to gain, again, additional understanding of some of the information contained in chapter 1. All right, good people. So at the end of this lecture, I encourage you, again, if you have not read it, please make sure that you read chapter 1. The PowerPoint slides will also be available in this week's folder. All right, everybody. Love, peace, and bacon grease. I bid you farewell, and I will see you in chapter 2.